So excited to dive into this topic with you. It's something that I have been in a very deep study of for probably longer than I realized, but consciously for a good year or more. So welcome to Sacred Rest. We're going to talk today about self-worth and self-care, the shamanic archetypes. Welcome. This is Leading with Spirit, the show for the spiritual guide who knows there's more depth, more truth, more realness in the work you're here to do. Whether you're a healer, coach, or intuitive, this podcast helps you reconnect with your gifts, trust your path, and lead from soul, not stress. Hosted by me, Spirit Bird. I'm a master shaman, best-selling author, and founder of Holton Healing Arts. My intention is that each episode brings grounded insight into spiritual growth, energy mastery, and the real-life journey of walking as a spiritual leader. You can find me at Spirit Bird Official. Enjoy the show. If you are new here, new to me, my name is Spirit Bird. I'm a shamanic healer, shamanic teacher, psychedelic coach. And I've been working in the field of shamanism for over 15 years or so, and have found my way into spiritual business and spiritual coaching in the last 6 or 8 years. And I've worked with people on all sorts of levels. The largest part of my work has been working with people on their own self-healing, and, calling in the life that they want. And, now I still do that work, but my focus has shifted more towards, teaching how to do this work so you can facilitate this within your own life and with your own clients. And I love helping people really integrate the spiritual side into their everyday life. I find that a lot of spiritual programs actually have us kind of go further away from life and into this separate realm, which then makes it even harder for you to come back into your everyday life. And to me, and within shamanism, that's not really the purpose of spiritual work. The purpose of spiritual work is to bring it all together, really be who we are out here in everyday life. So I'll share a little bit about the shamanic archetypes. We'll be diving into those later. But if you are new to my work, that is some of my proprietary work. Of course, there's lots of cultures and different ways that we measure archetypes. Within shamanism, I work within the wheel. So the wheel is the 4 directions. And each of these archetypes have basically a core energetic to them. And us as humans embody one of those core energetics. And I'll get more into that in a little bit. But the beauty of this work is when you begin to identify what those core energetics are for you, you can learn how to heal the shadow part of that energetic. So you're going to heal the wounds of that part of you and then step into the conscious version. Super exciting. And actually, it's really rich with a lot of information, but it also doesn't have to be that challenging. And the archetypes have helped lots of folks that I've worked with. I worked with Jen years ago, and she came to me with a lot of empath wounding, right? She had this empath overload. She had trouble standing up for what she wanted or saying no to people. And she was just really struggling with a lot of anxiety in her life. And she finally decided, I'm sick of this. And she came to me and we worked with the archetypes and did some private healing. And she, in the course of a few weeks together, she ended up getting a scholarship to a program that she had been wanting to get into for years. And then she met the love of her life shortly thereafter. Jackie's another example. She also worked with the archetypes. She was actually having a really hard time at work and trying to figure out what her purpose was because she was just running into so many struggles with other people in her place of work. And what was happening is she felt like she was standing up for herself or standing up for what was right. But what ended up happening is she kept getting very disliked by everybody that she worked with. And it just made for a really tumultuous work environment where she enjoyed the work she was doing, but she didn't enjoy going in every day because she had to interact with people and there was just so much tension. And she actually worked with her archetype and overcame that battle that she was in daily, and learned how to communicate with everyone else so she could enjoy going to work again. Leah, another lovely woman that I worked with, we worked at our archetype and she actually just exited the escapist pattern altogether. When we met, she was also really struggling with this place of, she just felt like she didn't have any power or control in her life. And it felt like everybody else actually got to make decisions for her. and she would let them, and she would come up with excuses of why she couldn't stand up for herself. And when we got clear on that archetype and some of the self-care that's associated with the archetype, she could actually show up fully and stand up for herself. It was really beautiful. And anyway, the list goes on, but I just kind of want to give you an idea of what this work can really do for you in your life. Today, I want to focus mostly on self-care within the archetypes. So if you've been following along, I've been doing a sacred self-care challenge, and challenge is maybe not quite the best word for it, because it was, well, maybe the best part about the challenge is that we're doing it I'm challenging you to do this different than you might normally do any other challenge, any other growth process. And I've really been focusing on very, very small steps, very slowly and one at a time. A lot of times when we want to make changes, we'll go all in, which is great. Actually, I work that way most of the time. Most of the time, I believe that you are fully capable of understanding and processing information on multiple levels at the same time. And that this idea that you're small and need to be spoon-fed things is an illusion, and I believe in you so much more. And when it comes to this sacred rest, I've learned from personal experience that slow is the best medicine. So a lot of people talk about self-care, right? And self-nourishment. And that can mean a lot of things. For most of us, you probably think of, taking a bath or getting a massage. And this idea of rest and self-care might seem kind of basic, but it's really not. And I'll share a little bit. Like last year, I got myself into what I would call the self-worth pit, where I just started to develop really low self-worth. And then I got into this trap within it where I could see myself at the bottom of this pit, where I just didn't feel great about myself. I felt like I didn't have control over things happening in my life. And I felt like I couldn't actually get any nourishment. I remember I kept saying I can see things to be grateful for, but I don't feel like I can actually feel it right now. And it's because I was blocking so much of the gratitude because of my low self-worth. And I could see that I had put myself at the bottom of that pit, but if you've been here, it doesn't matter how you got there. It's extremely hard to get out of. And so what I learned, I got myself out of this pit basically over the course of a year. It took me almost a year to really fully step out of it. And I did that by first disconnecting my sense of worth to the external, meaning, what my family looks like, or what my job is, or how successful I look, or, my body type, or what my house is like. Anything that you might use to evaluate your worth that's external, I slowly actually disconnected from so I could find myself again. What also helped me through this was understanding this new depth of layers within the shamanic archetypes that I teach. So typically I've understood them from the place of, how to heal. But I got a whole new perspective on how to work with your self-worth from within the archetypes. And I also got some help from working with plant medicine. And what I realized is it took me almost a year to really get myself out of this, but I had two big moments. The first one was, again, after I started to separate my self-worth from external things. And, I took some time and really over the course of a few weeks, worked pretty hard on that. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. And then I spent a lot of the rest of the year sort of slowly layering in more things to kind of help me come out of this pit. But I would say the biggest breakthrough that I really had was actually just a few weeks ago. And this was from dropping in this place of sacred rest. And again, this might seem kind of basic, but what I learned is that a lot of people talk about self-care and nourishment and why it's important. We all know it's important and how to do it, but most people skip over the intricacies of why we don't do it. We know we should, we try to, but we don't do it. So we skip over like why it doesn't happen when we know it's so good for us. And we also skip over talking about how hard can actually be to turn that ship around, how hard it can actually be to give yourself this sacred rest. So, again, for this challenge, what we've been working on so far really is just the first piece was just starting to make that intention, making intention to give yourself what I've been calling active rest. So, and I'm going to use that term probably interchangeably with that and sacred rest tonight. And when I say that, what I mean is really like intentional rest. So we're not checking out necessarily, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's not like zoning out while you're watching TV or, drinking or doing drugs or, there's a time and place for like checking out. So I don't mean to, make a judgment about it, but in this case, that's not what I'm talking about here. And what I'm talking about is, and it can be a variety of activities, but doing something actually really lovely and nourishing for yourself, that isn't actually tied to productivity or result. So that could mean, because we can talk about self-care and we can say, like working out is self-care, and it is, but oftentimes for most of us, it's still tied to something external. It's tied to the way we look, or it's tied to like having a sense of safety because we know we're healthy. So examples of this sacred rest or this active rest would be, taking a bath, getting a massage or getting Reiki, going out and doing something for yourself that you normally wouldn't do. And the piece that I've been doing the most actually is this active rest, where at least twice a day, I'll just take a break from whatever I'm doing and either go lay in my bed or lay on the floor or go lay outside on the grass and time myself for like 15 minutes and actually just rest. I'm still active. I'm not sleeping. I'm not checked out. I'm not zoning out. And I'm just breathing and letting my body receive. And what I learned is just doing those 15-minute breaks was so hard for me to get to. Yeah, because we are so busy. And for many of us, we do have our worth and our ability to take breaks wrapped up in something external. For a lot of us, what we do is we overwork. And then because we've overworked, we send ourselves to a place where we like have to take a break. Now we need to take a break. Like we've overdone it and we get sick or we get an accident or we just like can't not rest anymore. But then when we rest, we do that checking out, right? So you're overworking and then you're going to this other extreme where you're just like straight up checking out again, which is fine by itself, but that's also not totally nourishing. And what happens for most of us when you're on that pendulum swing is that when you're resting / checking out, you're actually just beating yourself up about the fact that you're taking a break. Like you're just telling yourself you're so lazy, or you're being like, oh, I really should be doing something else. And so it's not actually nourishing. It's not actually rest. And then because you feel bad because you did this like checkout, then you try to overcompensate by like working extra hard the next day, and you end up in this trapped cycle. So it took me several weeks of like very slow intention to break that barrier. And I learned a lot about our patterns in that process, which is what I want to share with you today. So before we jump in any further, I just want to take a second and let's go ahead and pause. And I'll invite you to close your eyes just for a moment. You maybe could put your hand on your heart or your belly or the tops of your legs. Just take a second and close your eyes and receive a couple breaths. And just tune into your body. You don't need to make any adjustments, just become aware of it. Mhm. And just kind of begin to slow your system down. Let yourself know that you're exactly where you need to be, that you're enough, that you can grow, but you don't need to be fixed. And then just make a little space in your energy to maybe receive something today that you haven't seen before or noticed before, or maybe wanted to ignore. And make the intention to allow yourself to receive it gracefully, gently. And then receive one more breath for yourself here. Hey, beautiful. So yeah, I just wanted to take a second and slow down. Again, those are those little moments where you get to teach yourself that you actually can stop and take a break and just receive. Also, I just wanted to take a break because I'm so excited about what I'm sharing today that I might be going fast, and I'm probably going to keep going fast, but I just wanted to take a second and ground everything. So, like I was saying, it took me, several weeks to actually even slow myself down enough that I could give myself those 15 minutes of active rest. The first layer that I noticed that I went through, like I started with that intention, and this is what I've been guiding you through in the Sacred Self-Care Challenge. First, making that intention, like, okay, I know I need this, I know I want this. I'm going to go ahead and make that intention that I get to give myself some sacred rest, whatever that might look like for you. And, it can change from day to day or week to week. I would say just start with one, just start with like the goal of doing even one of those 15-minute things once, and then you can build from there as needed. But first, make sure you can give it to yourself in a really deep way, and then it'll make everything after a lot easier, and it'll allow you to know when you need it too, because you'll know what you receive from it. So that first layer that I went through was blocked by a lot of external things. And really, I was just not allowing myself to take the break. So that was looking like, things like how home repairs kept coming up that needed to get taken care of. That looked like a lot of my thinking was like, oh, when this gets done, then I can take a rest. Oh, when I just finish this email, then I'll take a break. And then I would say that for every 15 minutes for the next 2 hours. Or, when I, make this X amount of money, then I can take a break, or when this happens, then I can take a break. So I noticed that was the first block I had to get through, was putting my rest after productivity. The next block I had to get through was once I finally realized, okay, it's safe, I can do this, then it was feeling bad if anybody else around me was busy. So if my partner was running around being busy or working hard, or I saw things that needed to be done, I felt bad. I felt bad just taking this time for myself. Then when I actually would take the time for myself, I started to notice that I would battle these voices in my head that were basically working the whole time. They were either planning what I was going to do when I got back to work, or trying to figure out something in my life, or some of the time they were just beating me up the whole time, telling me that I'm being lazy or being escapist or whatever they might be saying to me. So I had to go through that layer too, where I noticed those voices. And what I've learned there is, as you're stepping into this self-rest, into the self-care and sacred rest, it's okay if those voices are there the first few times. So be careful not to get into the trap where you then beat yourself up about the fact that you're beating yourself up while you're trying to rest. It's okay. Just give yourself the rest, even if you're not fully rested, because that's the first step. And then from there, each time you go back to it, it's going to be easier and easier. So then I let myself practice this rest even when I was sort of in this inner battle. And then I finally began to actually active rest. And when I started to do that, then I could actually release. I could actually release the emotions or release the tension, and I could actually receive. And so again, that sacred rest, what I'm talking about today, is that act of, that act of rest and that self-nourishment that's just for you and not tied to any kind of result or productivity or, external thing. It's just for you. So sacred rest and self-worth are deeply tied in this way. When we communicate to ourselves that we can slow down and rest, then just that act alone allows us to naturally disconnect your self-worth from the external. And it's challenging. That's why I wanted to share. I'm so excited to share this with you because I found it way more challenging than I thought it should be, and also like, I'm like a little spiritual guide, and I have cultivated an extremely intentional life. And I make a lot of my life and work around offering work that really lights me up and not overworking. And I still got caught in this trap, of tying my worth to the external and overworking and putting my self-worth last, or putting my self-nourishment after these external goals that I wanted to achieve. So I'm just saying, like, even for me, it surprised me how hard it was to give it to myself. It surprised me how much I needed it. I didn't realize how much, probably the last like 15 years, I guess, of being an entrepreneur, but probably more so just life, have really actually sort of messed up my nervous system, and I really needed to take a break. Yeah, and that break, we can know we need it, but it's so hard to actually give it to ourselves. And so that's why I want to talk about the archetypes again, because I noticed each time that I went through a layer through one of those other blocks that would come up that would sort of prevent me from giving myself this act of rest. There would be a particular piece that I kind of needed to see and work through. And then once I did, then I could relax into it even more. And of course, it's not the point to necessarily get a result from this. And you probably will. Most likely you will. And what I found is that the more that I gave myself, again, this act of rest, which sometimes was actually resting, like laying down and like relaxing my body. And sometimes that act of rest was going and doing something fun and nourishing for myself. That might be like going around and being in a group event or something that where I felt I got to nourish myself. Like I went to a retreat, and I went to like a little training in town, and just like things that were fun for me, where it wasn't about like self-improvement. And what I found is every time I gave that to myself, it essentially paid it back to me 2 to 3 times more. So again, that's not the goal. That's not why we're giving ourselves this rest. And it just goes to show that the belief that so many of us have, that the like busy and the working is what actually gives us the result, is just not true. And I want to say like one disclaimer here, because it feels like it'd be irresponsible not to. There are moments, like there are going to be parts of your life, or there might be parts of your life where this is extra hard. Like if you're actually like literally struggling with poverty. I know a lot of us are like, I'm poor, but we're not actually. We like live in nice homes, and we actually have nice food, and we have good health, and maybe it'd be stressful if we had a financial situation come up, but we're not going to be out of our house like in a week. You know what I mean? So I'm not trying to diminish how stressful sometimes money things can be, but I just want to name that like sometimes there's a big difference between like feeling like we don't have enough and like, actually we're like one of the wealthiest countries in the world. if you have internet, if you have all these basic needs. I know it's not necessarily, I know it can still be stressful, but you're not in poverty. And so it can be complicated if you are in poverty and your goal actually still is to give yourself some of this rest. It just might not be as extravagant as other people's versions. It might be those 15 minutes. It might be a little bit harder to find the support you need, but that makes those 15 minutes even more important for you. So that being said, I want to shift into the archetypes now, because each one has its own special way of blocking the rest that you need. And for most of us, these blocks are anchored in our wounds. And some of it is also anchored in conditioning and like just human history too. So even if you've done a bunch of like work on some of your core wounds or work through some of your trauma, you might find that you still overwork or override your body quite a lot. And again, that's largely from social conditioning too. So it's not just, it's like both, like sometimes in the spiritual community, they'll talk about how everything is like just your responsibility and is like it's all internal and the external is only a reflection of what's internal. And I actually don't agree with that or encourage that. I believe it's both. And so you need to work both. Anyway, that being said, so the archetypes, the idea behind them is that we have these 4 core energetics that make up a human. And so we all have all of these energetics. And most of us tend to lean in one direction or another. And so I use the 4 directions of the compass to talk about these energetics, the 4 directions, as you can see. What has us lean in these particular directions are usually some of our core wounds. And this is a both and. So it's usually some of the wounds that we first experience in our life. And it's also the curriculum, the teaching, the training that we chose to embody before we came to Earth. So it's a both and in that we chose a curriculum to understand ourselves, to learn more about being human before we came to Earth. And so that is what caused us to have the certain wounds so that we could lean in that direction and get that teaching. And it's the wounds that had us lean in that direction. So in the context of shamanism, and in particular in the context of my work and what I teach, the idea is that most of us have these wounds. It causes us to lean in this particular direction, which is basically like patterns or habits that we have, beliefs we have about the world, things that tend to happen a lot in our lives. And we fall in this direction. And the first stage of our life, we are in the process of basically, like the first layer is to make those wounds conscious, to become aware of what they are and how they work in our system. This is largely shadow work too, right? To become aware of like how it's inhibiting us and also how we might be diminishing ourselves out of habit, that's also ego, by the way. The diminishing yourself is very egoic. And also very shadowy. Like we don't realize that we're doing it to ourselves a lot. So we need to become aware of that and heal the wounds that have us act that way. Once that happens, then we get to become the conscious version of ourselves. So the goal isn't actually to stop the pattern from happening. The goal is to become conscious so that we can actually step into our correct role in the world and be who we came here to be. So I'm going to briefly go over each of the archetypes so you have a little bit of a framework here. As you're listening to this overview of the archetypes, pay attention because, again, we all have all of these patterns. So it's part of what makes us human and makes us whole. And there's probably going to be one that feels most like you. So kind of be listening for what resonates. It might be feeling for maybe what you have the most emotional response to. You might even notice like one that makes you more mad. So those are all really good clues that this actually might be one of the patterns. And just for some understanding, we all have one way we tend to lean, and then the rest kind of follow in a certain order, and it's different for each person. And we might be working one of these core energetics at a period of our life too. So you might tend to be north, but be working on the wound of the south, or you might tend to be east and be working on the wound of the north. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. So first, I want to talk about the north. We'll start there. So the north, generally, their struggle is feeling like they're either too much or not enough. And it's kind of that pendulum swing I was talking about earlier. So oftentimes when they were kids, they were told they were too loud or too bossy or too dramatic. That's another one, right? So what happens is they end up on this pendulum swing where, they felt like they were too much. And so then they felt bad. So they tried to quiet it. And then they go to this other side where they weren't getting their needs met. And then they felt like they weren't enough. And it goes back and forth. Oftentimes people that are caught in their north feel like no matter how hard they work, they don't get what they actually want. Oftentimes people in the north, they typically had to be adults at a pretty early age. So that might mean like the loss of a parent or just a bad parent where you had to, raise yourself. That's pretty common within the north. As adults, they tend to manage everything for everyone. They might be the matriarch or patriarch of a family. They're often in leadership roles, whether that's a company or their family, or they're at least very responsible for something, something important, and oftentimes can feel like if that they can't really rely on other people, that if they drop it so that other people can pick it up, that everything will fall apart. That they can't actually take their break. So the thing, like the biggest shadow that they are working through is actually that they believe the way they do things is the best way or is the right way, which is why they often block support and receiving, right? So it's like they would let somebody else help, but they're not going to do it the way that they would do it. And in their minds, they feel like that's wrong. So instead of just letting other people help them, they often can't even get that far because they'll drop it for a minute and they'll take it back over before the other person even gets to it, right? And so what this enforces as far as sacred rest is their belief that rest comes last, that it comes at the end of the list. So if you're in the north, your biggest block to sacred rest, the thing that you might be up against while you're trying to move into this place of sacred rest, is putting your own care at the end of the external things. And I kind of mentioned some of those earlier. So that very literally looks like I'll rest when I make X amount of money, or I'll rest when my kids get to X age. It can even look like I'll rest when a parent passes, or like when I leave my job, right? It's like the belief is that they cannot rest until these other things get taken care of first. And so you might, if you're noticing that you keep trying to make time for yourself, but it feels like you can't actually take the break. And I'll give you even like a trivial example. This can look like doing the dishes. Like maybe if you are frustrated because you feel like you're the only one that does the dishes in the house, and you try to not do them, but when you don't do them, then nobody does them. And it's so interesting because I know from experience, it can really feel like if you put it down, nobody picks it up. Typically they will, it's just going to be in their way. So it might mean there's some dishes in the sink for longer than you prefer, which can be uncomfortable, but if you can make it through that uncomfortable period, they will pick it up eventually. This is how to actually correct the block to the sacred rest in the north. And it's really counterintuitive, this one, but it's to lower the bar. It's actually, if you are trying to manage 5 things, let go of one of them. It will feel scary because it will feel like you're not enough. But that you're trying to manage too many things is why you're on the too much, not enough pendulum in the first place. Like that you should be capable of doing it all is the distortion that you're stuck in. And it's like anchored in this belief that you do it the right way and other people don't. Again, this is counterintuitive, but the correction is actually to drop one of the things so that you can do those other 4 things well. And so you don't have to be overexerting yourself and then have something blow up or not work, or you get exhausted and then it falls apart and then you have to start all the way over before and over and over and over again before you actually meet your goal. So that allows you to take the break, right? Because your break, your rest is attached to this external thing that needs to get done. Some examples of that, and in real life, again, that might be like cleaning the house. That might mean letting it get dirty and asking, for some support from people that maybe normally don't help. And again, this is tricky because sometimes it's going to feel like they're not helping you because they're not capable or they don't care, or they don't pay attention. But a lot of times it's like entangled with the fact that you don't let them, or they don't do it the way you want them to do it. So one example, can tell people that you're going to actually be trying this and that you need some support here, but then you have to let them help you, or hiring it out if you have the means. Something you might have to drop for a little bit is like organizing things for other people. Like that basic, like saying no when people ask you to put a party together or help with a fundraiser, is to just say no. You don't need to be like a super person. And again, trying to be the super person is what is having you feel like you aren't good enough. So let go of basically needing to be the best. And what is going to happen, even though, again, some of these examples are trivial, and this is just in the context of trying to get, like, allowing yourself for the sacred rest, it's going to feel like if you actually do this, if you're the North, it's going to feel like the whole world will come crashing down when you put this down, but actually it's going to set you free. And the same is true for each of the archetypes that I'm going to go through. So the South, they generally struggle with a feeling like there's something's just wrong with them. Like they were born messed up. Typically, they have a wall around their heart and they don't let people in. A lot of times they can have a pretty dark sense of humor. They can often appear kind of mean. Yeah, so the South often has a dark sense of humor and they can appear mean. They can appear like bullies. Sometimes they are bullies, sometimes they're not, but they seem like it to other people. They often love to argue and they usually prefer to just do things alone. So within the South, the biggest shadow that they're usually up against is that they're in denial that this is their pattern, that they're in denial that they feel like something's wrong with them at their core. Or what this looks like often is that they cover it up by showing up as really, really confident. And they show up so with so much confidence, they actually convince themselves they don't have the wound that they have. And so the way that the South blocks their sacred rest is that they don't think they need it in the first place. They actually override their body. And they also have this fundamental belief that rest is weakness. They believe that if they actually take a break, it will expose the fact that they're human and they're vulnerable, which will touch that place in them where they feel like they are just bad, like born bad, or born like with a flaw. So they do everything they can to override that. And you'll notice that people in the South are usually very hard on their bodies. They're usually really strong. They can work really hard. A lot of athletes are in their South. A lot of high stake executives are in their South. They like that, like risk taking, like edgy, challenging place. So they often block it to the point where, again, it causes this like experience where they have an accident or something, like their business breaks or they get sued, like some like really big dramatic thing happens because they're overriding all of the signals that actually they do need to take a break and they do need to rest. So if you feel like you might be in the South, you're probably already arguing with me about that this is even true. And again, that's why I kind of called in a little bit of spaciousness at the beginning, so that you might be able to receive some of this with grace and know that like you probably can feel on some level that you do need it, or you can know at least logically that you do need it, or maybe you're just hearing that from a lot of people. And so the block you're up against is thinking that you don't need it. How to correct that is basically to let your emotions be seen. So if you're in your South, you think that, if you reveal the need to rest, it will expose your flaw or vulnerability. And this is the part where, again, it's going to feel like you're dying or that the world's going to fall apart, right? If you go through this, but it will actually set you free. And so let your emotions be seen. This is actually how you get your needs met. And it's how other people get their needs met from you. And so oftentimes when the South actually does finally drop into that rest, they might, for most of us, unless we happen to like live alone and not have anything to take care of, most of the time to get our rest, we do need to communicate with people in some way, either letting them know we are taking a break, letting them know not to disturb us, letting them know we might be doing something different than we normally do, asking for help so we have the time to do it, right? So this is also true of the South, but they're going to think that they can do it on their own and you can't. So, so when you actually ask, like when you get to that point where you need to ask for help or at least express that you're doing this for yourself, you might start to feel emotional. It's why the South normally will turn around. They'll be like, oh God. And they'll go the other way, right? So just be aware of that. And if you happen to live with somebody who's in the South, be aware of this too. Be aware of all of these archetypes. There's going to be some you identify with for yourself. There's probably going to be the other ones, or maybe the same ones that you're like, oh, yep, that's my spouse. Or yep, that's my boss. So it's helpful to know these because it's not so that you can give people excuses to do shitty things. That is not what this is about, but it is so that you can understand where they're coming from and help meet them. And so that they can help meet you. So, again, just to summarize that, the South, you are going to need to work on like talking to your spouse. If you are with a partner that is in the South, they're probably going to think they're fine. So you might need to be the one to initiate the conversation and just know that you're going to be hitting on a really tender place. So if you happen to, be with somebody who every time you encourage them to take a break and take care of themselves turns into a fight, know that this is what they're up against. And again, remember that it might feel like the world will come crashing down, but it's not. It's actually going to set you free. And just keep in mind also that we are in a big paradigm shift, that the world has been, different and that things are speeding up. We're evolving much faster. Technology is evolving faster than we are emotionally. And so we're moving into this place where like all of this technology and all of this evolution is allowing us to actually rest more. And we have to take it. That's what helps propel us into this new earth, new life thing that so many of us are seeking, or at least like exiting this world of like constant struggle. Okay, I'm curious if anybody feels like they identify with the South. If you feel like you identify with the South, or maybe if your partner is, go ahead and add that into the chat box. All right, so I'll move on to the East. So the East's biggest struggle is just being on Earth. They usually feel like they shouldn't be here, that almost like they might feel like an alien, or that was a mistake that they're here, or they're not cut out for the world. And therefore they usually struggle with actual physical embodiment, like being in their body. So They might show up if you might identify this or know somebody who is like this as being kind of spacey. Often they're very mystical or very spiritual naturally. Often people in the East are very psychic naturally, or at least very sensitive. When they're unconscious, it can show up as like acting, feeling, believing that they're better than other people. Or it can also show up as like believing that like they have a lot of special needs that they believe other people should accommodate, like other people have to accommodate their sensitivities. And also I just want to add with each of the archetypes, like there is a gift and a shadow, of course. And so the more that you give yourself permission to look into the shadow, the more you're going to access that gift. So the biggest shadow with the East is avoiding being in the body. Like for them, they believe to stay safe, they need to stay out of the body. And they believe that they can't actually get into the body until the world changes, basically. Either, somebody in their life needs to change, or the system needs to change, or the whole world needs to change. And then when these external things happen, that are usually more related to people and systems, like they're related to safety, when those things change, then they'll get in their body. And of course, because they're out of their body, they're going to keep experiencing things that make it feel like it's unsafe. So it becomes this like fork in the road where they just can't seem to get past this block. So when it comes to sacred rest, it's even more important to them, because actually this rest is what's going to allow them to get into their body. And I'll backtrack too, same with the other two directions. With the South, the sacred rest is what's going to allow them to actually get into their vulnerability, which is their gift. And with the North, that rest is going to allow them to actually find balance, which allows them to be like an evolved leader. It allows them to be geniuses at putting community and team together instead of doing everything themselves. So with the East, you're right, once they actually rest, they can get into their body, which means that their gifts can come online, and all of their sensitivities and mystical nature and like special like visions get to come into the world and actually make a difference. So the biggest block that the East experiences with sacred rest is they wait for other people or the environment to change before they can get in their body. And again, that might look like, like one of their roommates is violent or mean. No, well, I mean, violent isn't the right word. I should say, if you're in a violent situation, get out. But it might look like, somebody in your house is aggressive, and they might not actually be aggressive. You might just experience it that way if you're East. And so you're like, well, I can't actually get in my body until they get out. Or it might look like you're trying to rest, but there's construction nearby and you can't actually rest because there's sound. And so this is also kind of counterintuitive, but the way to correct this is to let yourself be alone. Now, this is where we need to be careful if you're the East, because it's not forever and it's not for long. The East can also, like in the unconscious version, can get caught up in trying to escape. So remember that it's important to know, as you're moving into the sacred rest, that you're resting to give yourself the safety to get into your body. It's not to escape the reality of the world. But you do want to get yourself alone long enough so that you can actually take breaks and like basically let your nervous system relax, and be able to do that without having to monitor what's happening around you. So what that's going to look like is maybe you do book a room somewhere nice, or rent a cabin or something for a day or two. Maybe that looks like going and doing something you really love that's kind of alone, that's not dependent on other people you're around being a certain way. It can look like just finding a room in your house that you can turn into a sacred space. This is a beautiful thing to give yourself if you're East. Even if it's not like a closed off room, just a corner of the house that you get to make sort of like a peaceful place for your spiritual center. This does wonders for you if they're in the East, because you naturally have this inclination to be very sensitive to the environment in this way. If you can, make a room for yourself. and, communicate to your family or the people that you live with that this is what you're doing, that you need some time and space for yourself. Lock the door. Or you can go out into nature alone. Mm-hmm. So, what you can get caught up in is while you're trying to do this, if it feels like it's upsetting to other people, and then it feels like overstimulating for you, then this is the block. So just know that you have to, like, this is the thing you have to get through, that you have to just give yourself some alone time so you can just actually be with yourself and get in your body. Then with the West, so the West is the last of the archetypes that I'm going to talk about today. So the West is our empathic friend. They're very, very focused on the collective. They have trouble telling what are their feelings and what are other people's feelings. This is like a core issue that if you are West, you probably struggle with. Typically they worry about getting things wrong, or at least like definitely what other people think. That is a big, big issue for them. And so they also tend to cater to other people's preferences. They do have very, very, very big hearts. And they're just naturally tuned into the collective. They're naturally tuned into like what would be better for all. And in the unconscious wounded version, that's at a detriment to themselves. So the biggest shadow that most of them are up against is believing that rescuing or helping others is where their worth comes from. They think that's what makes them worthy or a good person, or that it's the best measure of character. So again, it means well, but the problem is it's so extreme typically that it's at their own detriment, which has them like removed from the collective in general. It's like for the collective to function, it needs all of the voices. And it's interesting because in the context of shamanism specifically, in shamanism, we believe that everything has an essence or a spirit, and we can interact with the spirit of everything, especially in the natural world, but even not in the natural world. My computer, my desk, all of these things have an essence that I can actually interact with. And so the idea is that we are, in balance here. And if you are living a shamanic life or practicing shamanism, part of what you might be doing is actually checking in with the essence or the spirit of other things. They want and need to be tended to. It's said that if we forget to speak to the moon, that, the moon will essentially get sad and leave us. Right. And we have everything is connected to the moon because it's also connected to water. And so therefore we need to remember to thank the moon or honor the moon, or at least say, hey, what's up? And so for a lot of us, we understand this actually innately. And it's so interesting because the West tends to be very aware of that naturally too. And they take themselves out of their own equation. They don't even include themselves in the collective, and they don't even realize that they're not including themselves because, again, they've attached their belief that their character is judged on them helping others. And so that biggest block to sacred rest is usually that everybody else's needs come first before they get to pay attention to their needs. And usually, like, if you're very unconscious about it, you won't even realize that you're blocking your own needs. It's based on this fundamental belief that rest is actually selfish, or that self-care is actually selfish. I always say that it's this moving from the wounded unconscious version to the conscious version is moving from this idea of being self-centered, right? Our wounded perspective is that it's self-centered, but the conscious version is that you're actually centered in yourself. I was speaking to a friend recently, and they're very much in this West wound. And so anytime I asked them about themselves, they would actually answer by naming everything else in their life. They were talking about, people that they work with, and they talked about their spouse, and they talked about their kids, and they talked about something in the community. Like they never even actually answered from themselves. So this is what the West can look like. And this is the biggest block they're up against for that sacred rest. So how to correct that is when you care for yourself first. And to know, I know most of you know this already. We talk about this a lot. It's like common rhetoric now, but it's still really hard to give to ourselves. Yeah, it's really hard to give to ourselves because this belief that being taking care of ourselves is selfish is so ingrained. And the way to get through it, the way to actually learn it is to try it. Just try it out. Yeah. And so when you care for yourself first, you can care for others better and more authentically, which is also better for others. So what I always tell the people in the West is if you have to, bribe yourself. Just bribe yourself and know that actually you're caring for others more when you take this time to rest yourself. So if you're in the West, like what would be selfishly delightful for you? What's something even really small that you would love to do for yourself that you maybe don't even want anyone to know? And you might be tending, like what you're going to be up against is that you will probably find yourself worried about others' reaction to that. And so that's what you actually need to let go of, that you just need to just try it on, see what happens. Because I promise you, you're going to find that it actually wasn't that bad. And in the end, it's going to be so much better for everyone else. So again, something small, a small example of this might even be picking out where you want to eat and not worrying about it if other people like it. And again, this is such a small thing, but this is such a great step towards that sacred self-care, that sacred rest. And it might feel like the world is going to come crashing down, but it will actually set you free, and it will set the people around you free too. So Melissa, you feel like you're a little bit of north and rest. It's common, like, so all of us are going to have one where we generally like tend to lean to, but keep in mind that we have all of them too. So it could be that you're like almost 50-50, or it could be that, and sometimes they can look like others. Like sometimes one direction can sort of look like another direction. And I go into that in the shamanic archetypes, and then we deep dive into that in shaman school and learn how to help the healing process for other people through this. But we can also be in periods in our life where we're learning the curriculum of one. So for example, you might be primarily north, but maybe you've actually already done some work there and you're kind of conscious. And then you get to a period of your life where you still are primary north, but you're learning how to heal the west wound at that particular time. A lot of times that's related to the stages of life too. And I talk about this a little bit. I talk about this a lot in shaman school and also in the shamanic archetypes course, actually, that the wheel has each of these core energetics, but it also has this like the whole stages of life, and those directions relate to certain stages of life too. Shifting this order will fundamentally change your life. Shifting the order of what you put before the rest and go ahead and just give yourself the rest first is a complete game changer. And like I was sharing at the beginning, I really struggled with like working through this self-worth piece for the last year of like, even as conscious as I am and as much of this work that I do, I still got caught up in it. And I got to really see how challenging it actually be to give yourself this very, very simple thing. But I also got to see how quickly it shifted things for me in my life when I actually just did that. And so it's important to know, it's helpful to know these archetypes and those blocks that you might encounter, because most likely you are going to have to coach yourself. You're going to have to coach yourself through it. Like if you are associating you being able to take a break with like meeting a certain salary amount or like a certain amount in your savings account, you are going to probably always be pushing that out further and further and further. And what might happen is you might believe that if you take this break, that's all going to come crashing down, but most likely it really won't. That's just what we're telling ourselves. So you have to see that and be like, you know what? Actually, I'm okay. If this happens, if I take a break, even if I like lose a little income or something, I'm still okay. I'm not dying. So I'm going to try. It might look like, if you think you're going to give yourself this, that someone in your family is going to freak out. And they might. But you should also know that it's okay, that you're not dying and they're not dying. And actually, this is going to bring you closer and going to support both of you more. It might look like if you actually express your emotions and get vulnerable, that, your whole everything about you will crumble. It's just not true. But what happens is we are so informed by these wounds in the curriculum that we're on that it's really hard to see past it. And so we can do, and I'm a big fan of doing that wound work and, the initial trauma work. It's super brilliant and important. And just know when it comes to this self-worth piece that you kind of can skip that if you can just go ahead and give yourself the rest and just go ahead when you're actually doing your active rest practice. Again, whether that means, resting for 15 minutes on your bed and staying conscious and being present, but not beating yourself up, whether that looks like a bath, whether that looks like Reiki, whether that looks like, I don't know, whatever it might be for you, making a little spiritual corner, doing a ritual. Just know that those simple acts, when you can give them to yourself without having it to be attached to productivity, can completely change your life and skip over all of that inner work that you probably will need to do at some point, but not necessarily so that you can find your own self-worth. It's just the actual act of giving yourself this rest first. Thank you so much for being here today. Again, I was so excited to share this piece because I've been in a deep study of it and I find these simple things to be so, so powerful. All right, my loves. Again, thank you so much for being here and hopefully I'll see you soon. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye for now. Thanks for joining me today. If you enjoyed the show, would you subscribe and leave us a review? Let us know you did at Spirit Bird Official. We love to support our listeners. And if you enjoyed the show, please share it with someone else who would also enjoy it. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.